Weather is about to change in a big way. The global news reported that on February 1st, 2026, the major winter storm across North America caused at least 137 deaths and widespread disruptions, with over 3,000 flights canceled amid real ID enforcement start. And what else is coming? Well, the US Department of Justice did just release over 3 million Epstein documents. 2026 is off to an interesting year for sure. But right now, as you watch this, a major Arctic blast is pushing across the country, bringing widespread extreme cold and shattering temperature records for millions of people, especially across the southeastern United States. Falling iguanas in Florida, crazy snow in the Carolinas. But the weather pattern change that is coming this week will surprise you. The jet stream is about to take a major turn, which will alter who sees big snow to start February and who sees the most intense cold air over the next 7 days. But that's not all. The polar vortex is gearing up again to unleash an even larger shot of cold air in February, as a significant disruption is likely during the first half of February, as a result of a sudden stratospheric warming event, with a possible split of the vortex into 2 distinct circulation centers. If you're watching this and feeling like winter 2026 is unlike anything you've experienced before, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to show you explains why this pattern is so dangerous and why it's only getting started. Let's break down exactly what you need to know about this major weather pattern change that'll impact the entire country, because what's building in the atmosphere right now could make the next few weeks some of the coldest and snowiest we've seen in years. Let me start with what's happening at this very moment, because the cold air flooding across the United States is absolutely historic. We're looking at temperatures that are 20 to 30 degrees below average across massive portions of the country, with some areas experiencing the coldest air they've seen in decades. Right now, this morning, temperatures are in the single digits and below zero across much of the northern tier. But here's what's shocking. The cold has pushed all the way down into Florida. We're talking about temperatures near freezing even in Miami. Across the state of Florida, we have dozens of temperature records being broken. And yes, we have falling iguanas all across the state as well. It is an emergency out there for falling iguanas. Temperatures are basically below 30 degrees in almost all of Florida this morning. It is pretty crazy stuff. The cold air is so intense that it's creating conditions we rarely see this far south. But let me explain what's driving this. This right here is our jet stream, which are the upper level winds. And right now, we have a very large dip in our jet stream all across the eastern tier of the United States. This dip in the jet stream is allowing for Arctic air to make its way all the way down into Florida, where we're seeing these record-breaking temperatures. Think of the jet stream as a river of air flowing high in the atmosphere, typically 6 to 9 miles above the surface. When it flows in a relatively straight line from west to east, we get fairly normal weather patterns. But when it develops these big dips and troughs, like we're seeing right now, it acts like a highway for Arctic air to travel southward. The technical term for what we're experiencing is a meridional flow pattern, where the jet stream has exaggerated north to south undulations instead of flowing smoothly west to east. This configuration allows polar air masses to plunge deep into the mid-latitudes, bringing temperatures that are typical of the Arctic Circle to places like Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. Now, across the Midwest and Northeast, we're seeing sub-zero temperatures. Areas in northern Minnesota are experiencing temperatures well below zero, some locations approaching 20-degree spike skies or colder. When you factor in the wind chill, we're talking about feels-like temperatures of 30-degree frost to 40-degree frost in some areas. At those temperatures, frostbite can occur on exposed skin in less than 10 minutes. This is not just uncomfortable cold. This is dangerous, life-threatening cold that requires people to take serious precautions. The cold air is so intense that it's creating what meteorologists call an Arctic high-pressure system. This is a massive dome of dense, cold air that settles over a region and suppresses any warming. The high pressure creates clear skies, which allows for radiational cooling at night, where heat escapes into space and temperatures plummet even further. But here's what makes this particular Arctic outbreak different from typical winter cold snaps: the duration and the geographic extent. We're not talking about a quick shot of cold air that moves through in 24 to 48 hours. This Arctic air mass has been in place for days, and it's going to persist for several more days before we see any moderation. And the geographic extent is remarkable. From the Canadian border all the way to the Gulf Coast, from the Rockies to the Atlantic, nearly the entire eastern two-thirds of the United States is experiencing well below normal temperatures simultaneously. This kind of widespread, persistent cold is the signature of a disrupted polar vortex, which we'll talk about in detail shortly. But first, let me show you what's happening with the snow, because the cold air is only part of the story. I want to talk about yesterday's winter storm because it overperformed significantly across North Carolina. Areas near Asheboro, Greensboro, back towards Charlotte saw a widespread 12 to 18 inches of snowfall. That is absolutely massive for this region. Back over in Raleigh, these areas were not as fortunate. We had a large dry slot, and that led to basically only about 1, 2, maybe 3 inches of snow for most of you. Some isolated locations picked up closer to 5 to 6 inches. And back over near Cape Hatteras, many areas pushed over a foot of snowfall from this winter storm, so big numbers across North Carolina. Other areas like South Carolina and Georgia also had some decent numbers, especially near Columbia and Myrtle Beach. Now, I think one takeaway from this winter storm in the Carolinas is that people will basically use anything to get snow out of areas like their patio and their driveway. Using a leaf blower is definitely a new one that I saw on social media. But let me explain why this storm was so significant and why it matters for what's coming. The Carolinas are not typically known for major snowstorms. They get snow occasionally, maybe a few inches here and there, but 12 to 18 inches, that's the kind of snowfall you expect in the Northeast or the upper Midwest, not in North Carolina. The reason this storm produced such impressive totals is because of the perfect alignment of several factors. First, we had abundant moisture streaming in from the Atlantic Ocean. Second, we had that deep pool of Arctic air already in place, ensuring that temperatures stayed well below freezing throughout the storm. And third, we had strong upper-level dynamics, meaning the jet stream was positioned perfectly to enhance lift and precipitation. When all three of these ingredients come together, you get what meteorologists call a Miller-B type storm, where a coastal low-pressure system intensifies rapidly and produces heavy snow along the I-95 corridor and inland areas. But here's what's important to understand. This storm was not an isolated event. This storm was a product of the larger atmospheric pattern that has been locked in place for weeks now. And that pattern is not going away. In fact, it's about to intensify. The snow that fell across the Carolinas is going to stick around for a while because the cold air is not going anywhere. And when you have snow on the ground, it creates a feedback loop. The white surface reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it, which keeps temperatures colder than they would otherwise be. This is called the snow-albedo feedback, and it's one of the reasons why once you get a significant snowpack established, it can be very difficult to get rid of it. Now, over the next few days, we are going to see a major weather pattern change that is going to affect nearly all of the United States. So let's talk more about it. This is the critical part you need to understand. The jet stream configuration that brought us the Arctic blast and yesterday's snowstorm is about to shift. And this shift is going to determine who gets the next round of heavy snow and who experiences the most intense cold over the coming week. As we go into late tomorrow and as well as Tuesday, our weather pattern is going to really start to change because our jet stream is going to go from that very large dip to more of a northwesterly to southeasterly flow that is going to stretch from Washington back into the southeast. What this basically means is that our weather should be a lot quieter for the next few days, as we do not have any sort of organized low-pressure system that will be developing. However, by Wednesday and Thursday is when our next shot of Arctic air, and as well as snow, will exist. It'll be mainly impacting areas back over here in the Ohio Valley, back in the mid-Atlantic, and an Arctic blast will make its way down into the southern plains and all along the east coast, where temperatures are going to drop significantly again. Let me show you what this looks like on the models. By the end of the week is when our weather pattern is going to favor a lot of snow, especially from the northern plains. Back over into the northeast, we are returning to the weather pattern that we basically saw back in December, where we saw some favorable setups for some snowfall in the Midwest, and also the Northeast, and even across the Great Lakes. That is because a ridge is going to be building back over in the Rockies and along the West Coast. That'll keep areas on the West Coast a lot warmer and drier. Unfortunately, though, the people in the East Coast are going to be suffering consequences as we will be dealing with below average average temperatures yet again, another significant Arctic blast by this upcoming weekend. And then on top of that, we'll be dealing with more snowfall. This pattern is what meteorologists call an omega block or a Rex block, depending on the specific configuration. It's characterized by high pressure over the western United States and low pressure over the eastern United States, with the jet stream forced to flow around these semi-permanent features. When this pattern sets up, it can persist for days or even weeks, leading to prolonged periods of the same type of weather. For the west, that means dry and mild conditions. For the east, that means cold and stormy conditions. Now, I know all of you are sick and tired of me saying Arctic blast, but I hate to say it, we're going to be seeing it even more this week. After this Arctic blast makes its way out of the United States tonight and tomorrow, the cold air will linger all up and down the East Coast at least through Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday, another cold front is going to make its way across Texas, back into the Northeast, where temperatures will fall once again by as much as 20 to 30 degrees. So more cold air is on the way. And then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday is when we're going to get a really strong low-pressure system developing over the Northeast. This could bring some snowfall to areas in New England, the Great Lakes, and the Midwest. And on top of that, another significant shot of Arctic air is going to build. So if you're in the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast, anywhere in the Ohio Valley, it is going to be bone-chilling cold for all of those areas this upcoming weekend. And then by next week, that cold air could just linger across the Northeast. It could be a brutal stretch of weather for those over in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast over the next 7 to 10 days. Let me show you the temperature departures to really drive this home. This is the departure from average for our temperatures for today. Most of the East Coast is dealing with temperatures as much as 20 to 30 degrees below average. By the middle of the week, another shot of Arctic air will stretch from Texas back into the Northeast. Not nearly as significant, but our next Arctic blast will be a lot more significant by next weekend. Now we need to talk about the polar vortex, because what's happening in the stratosphere right now is going to determine whether this cold pattern continues for weeks or finally breaks down and allows milder air to return. The polar vortex is gearing up again to unleash an even larger shot of cold air in February, as a significant disruption of the polar vortex is likely during the first half of February as a result of a sudden stratospheric warming event with a possible split of the vortex into two distinct circulation centers. Let me explain what this means in plain English. The polar vortex is a large area of low pressure and cold air that surrounds both of Earth's poles. It exists year-round, but is strongest during winter when the temperature contrast between the polar regions and the mid-latitudes is greatest. The vortex is not a single surface-level storm. It's a large-scale circulation pattern that extends from the surface all the way up into the stratosphere, which is the layer of atmosphere above where most weather occurs, roughly 10 to 30 miles above the surface. When the polar vortex is strong and stable, it acts like a containment system, keeping the coldest air locked up near the poles. The jet stream flows in relatively smooth waves around the mid-latitudes, and we get fairly typical winter weather. But when the polar vortex weakens or becomes disrupted, that's when things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean potentially dangerous for millions of people. A sudden stratospheric warming event is exactly what it sounds like. Temperatures in the stratosphere over the polar region suddenly spike, sometimes by as much as 50 degrees Celsius in just a few days. This warming disrupts the circulation of the polar vortex, causing it to weaken, become distorted, or even split into multiple pieces. When this happens, the jet stream becomes much wavier, developing deep troughs and ridges. These troughs allow Arctic air to spill southward into the mid-latitudes, while the ridges allow warmer air to push northward. The result is wild temperature swings and increased potential for extreme weather events. Now, here's what's particularly concerning about the current situation. We've already experienced one polar vortex disruption earlier this winter, which is what brought us the cold and snow we've been dealing with. But the models are now showing that another, potentially more significant disruption is on the way. Let me show you what the stratosphere looks like right now. This is the current state of the stratosphere up here at 50 millibars, which is about 12 miles above the surface. You can see this kind of oval shape. That's a stratospheric polar vortex right there. You see it's kind of an oval. A lot of times it's circular and keeps all the cold air bottled up near the pole. That is not what is happening according to the European model. And as we run this out, this will take us out for 2 weeks. Look what happens as we get on out toward Monday, February the 2nd, and then we roll this out further. Thursday, Tuesday, February the 3rd, 4th, 5th. And let's make this get on into the 2-week zone. There we go. And look what happens by the time we get to February the 4th and 5th, and on out beyond that. We have a legitimate split here. Look at this. See this? There's a lobe. There's a lobe there. And it is just an indication that we could see a continuation of the meandering jet and maybe southward displacement of the jet. This is a pretty good signal for colder than normal conditions potentially, so just another feather in the cap of that. And if you take a look here, let's get on this display and you can actually see things better. This is the weeklies, what they're doing with the vortex. They really do a big warming here as we get into Friday, February the 13th, and then it just keeps the vortex weak. This is normal strength way up here, and virtually all the ensembles and even the mean keep the vortex very, very, very weak. That is something to behold. We don't see this occasionally, but this thing has been weak the entire winter almost. And that has been one of the reasons I think that we've had so many Arctic blasts. When the polar vortex splits into 2 or more pieces, it's called a vortex split event, and it's one of the most dramatic disruptions that can occur. The split pieces can wander away from the pole, sometimes positioning themselves over North America or Europe, bringing prolonged periods of extreme cold to those regions. The last major vortex split occurred in January 2021, and it led to the catastrophic winter storm that hit Texas and the southern United States, causing widespread power failures and hundreds of deaths. That event demonstrated just how vulnerable our infrastructure is to extreme cold, especially in regions that don't typically experience such conditions. Now, I'm not saying we're going to see a repeat of February 2021, but I am saying that the atmospheric setup is similar, and we need to be prepared for the possibility of sustained, extreme cold lasting well into February and possibly into early March. Let me walk you through what's coming over the next week, because we have multiple winter weather threats lining up that could impact tens of millions of people. We are looking at a parade of systems that will keep the snow flying across the northern tier and potentially deliver another significant punch to the mid-Atlantic and even the Carolinas by the end of the week. Starting with Monday and Tuesday, we have a winter storm dropping out of Canada that is going to impact Wisconsin and Michigan. This system is riding along the northern branch of the jet stream and will bring widespread snow to the Great Lakes region. The cold air flooding in behind this system is going to be impressive. Wisconsin is looking at a solid 4 to 8 inches across much of the state, with higher amounts possible in the snowbelt regions that get that lake enhancement effect. Milwaukee needs to prepare for significant accumulation that could impact the Monday evening commute and make Tuesday morning travel treacherous. Madison is in a similar situation with snow arriving Monday night and continuing through Tuesday. Green Bay and the Fox Valley region could see even higher totals as they are positioned perfectly to receive lake effect enhancement from Lake Michigan. The timing of this system means Monday night into Tuesday morning is going to be the most dangerous period for travel across Wisconsin. Snowplows will be working overtime, but during the heaviest snow bands, they simply cannot keep up with accumulation rates that could reach 1 to 2 inches per hour at times. Michigan is going to get hit hard by this system as well. The lower peninsula will see widespread snow, with amounts ranging from 4 to 6 inches in the southern portions up to potentially 10 inches or more across the northern lower peninsula. Detroit is looking at a solid 4 to 6 inches, with snow arriving Monday evening and continuing overnight. The morning commute Tuesday is going to be a mess, so plan accordingly. Grand Rapids is in the prime zone for lake effect enhancement and could see totals pushing toward 8 inches or higher. The upper peninsula is going to get absolutely hammered with this system. When you combine the synoptic snowfall from the main system with the lake effect enhancement, some locations could see over a foot of snow. Marquette, Houghton, and the Keweenaw Peninsula are going to be buried. Now here is where it gets interesting for areas further south and east. As that system moves through the Great Lakes, energy is going to eject out ahead of it and develop a secondary low that will impact Indiana and Ohio Tuesday evening. Indianapolis is looking at snow arriving Tuesday afternoon and intensifying through the evening hours. This could be a significant rush hour impact for the city. Total accumulation in Indianapolis could reach 4 to 6 inches, with locally higher amounts possible if heavier snow bands set up over the city. Ohio is going to see widespread impacts from this system. Columbus is looking at snow intensifying Tuesday evening and continuing overnight into Wednesday morning. 4 to 6 inches of accumulation is expected across the central Ohio region. Cleveland will see similar timing with snow ramping up Tuesday evening. The lake effect machine could kick in behind this system and add additional accumulation for communities along the Lake Erie snowbelt. This Ohio Valley storm does not stop in the Midwest. It continues tracking northeast and will reach West Virginia Tuesday night into Wednesday morning. The mountain state is going to see significant accumulation, particularly in the higher elevations where snow ratios will be favorable. Charleston is looking at 3 to 5 inches of accumulation. Morgantown and the northern panhandle could see 4 to 6 inches, but the real jackpot totals will be in the mountains where 6 to 10 inches is possible from this system. By Wednesday, this storm reaches Virginia and the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. This is where things get tricky because the exact track will determine whether the nation's capital sees significant snow or gets caught on the warmer side of the system with mixing issues. Right now, it looks like northern Virginia and D.C. could see 3 to 5 inches of accumulation with higher amounts to the north and west. The Interstate 66 corridor from Front Royal through Manassas into Arlington is looking at a solid snow event. Montgomery County, Maryland, and the northern suburbs of D.C. could see the highest totals in the metro area, potentially pushing towards 6 inches. Downtown Washington and the immediate district could see 3 to 4 inches, which is more than enough to create absolute chaos on the roads. We all know how D.C. handles even modest snow events, so expect significant disruptions to the Wednesday morning commute. Federal offices may be delayed or closed, so keep an eye on OPM announcements. Now let me tell you about what has me really watching the long-range models with great interest. Friday brings another major winter storm dropping out of Canada, and this one could be significant. The pattern is setting up for a strong northern stream system to dive southeast and potentially interact with moisture streaming up from the Gulf of Mexico. When you get that kind of phasing between northern and southern stream energy, you can get an explosive winter storm that delivers historic impacts. The early indications are that this Friday system could bring significant snow from the Great Lakes all the way down through the Ohio Valley and into the mid-Atlantic. But here is the part that has my attention, and frankly has me a bit concerned for areas still recovering from this weekend. Some of the model guidance is suggesting this storm could reach as far south as the Carolinas. Now, I need to be very clear here, because I do not want anyone to panic or make decisions based on information that could change significantly. We are still several days out from this system, and a lot can change between now and Friday. The exact track, the timing of the energy phasing, and the position of the cold air will all determine who sees significant snow and who gets left out. But the signal is there for another potentially major winter event. If the Friday storm does materialize and track close enough to the Carolinas, we could be looking at a truly historic stretch for the region. Coming off this weekend's major storm and then getting hit again by Friday would be absolutely remarkable. Charlotte, Raleigh, Greensboro, and the Virginia cities would need to be on high alert for round 2 before they have even finished digging out from round 1. The cold air is going to be firmly in place to support snow across the entire eastern United States through the first week of February. We are not warming up anytime soon. Multiple waves of Arctic air will continue reinforcing the cold, and each disturbance that comes through has the potential to produce accumulating snow, even in areas that typically see these systems come through as rain. Let me show you what the models are depicting for this Friday system. The European model is showing a strong low-pressure system developing over the Ohio Valley and tracking toward the mid-Atlantic. The GFS model is showing something similar, though with slightly different timing and track. When multiple models agree on the general pattern, even if they differ on the specifics, that increases our confidence that something significant is likely to happen. The question is not whether we'll see a storm on Friday. The question is how strong it will be and exactly where it will track. For the Great Lakes and Midwest, Friday morning through Saturday morning looks like the prime window for heavy snow. We could be looking at another 6 to 12 inches across Wisconsin, Michigan, northern Illinois, and northern Indiana. For the Ohio Valley and Mid-Atlantic, Friday afternoon through Saturday morning is the time frame to watch. If the storm tracks along the I-70 corridor, we could see significant snow from Indianapolis through Columbus and into Pittsburgh and Washington, D.C. If the storm tracks further south, closer to the I-64 corridor, then areas like Louisville, Charleston, W.V., and Richmond could see the heaviest snow. And if it tracks even further south, we're talking about another major snow event for the Carolinas. The uncertainty at this range is still high, but the potential is there for a significant winter storm that could affect a huge swath of the eastern United States. This is the kind of storm that could produce travel nightmares, power outages, and dangerous conditions for millions of people. Let me put all of this in historical context, because February has a well-earned reputation as one of the coldest and snowiest months of the year across much of the United States. February is notorious for having the polar vortex unleash very cold air in the United States, and over the next week or so, we are likely going to see a stratospheric warming event occur back over in the Arctic. And that could allow for this Arctic air mass to pinch and go down to the south into the United States. If that were to happen, we could have a pretty big Arctic blast sometime around the middle of February. So this is definitely something that we'll be keeping a close eye on over the next several days. Models are hinting at some very cold air around the middle of the month, and this would be exactly why. So definitely make sure that you're still ready. Winter is nowhere near done. February is one of the more active months when it comes to both snow, ice, and as well as Arctic air. Let me show you what the long-range models are depicting. The CFS, which is the US climate model, is showing a pattern for February. That is one of the very, very, very best patterns I've ever seen this model show for cold and snow. It's a climate model. It usually runs warm. It has all of your months ahead warm, warm, warm. Here is the month of February. It is warm in the west. Look at this big anomaly up here over Greenland or south of Greenland. See that right there? That is a big time west-based NAO, negative NAO, North Atlantic Oscillation pattern. When you see this along with ridging out here, you are going to get cold here. As long as cold is on our side of the world, and cold is on our side of the world, if this pattern comes into fruition, this area of the country down here is going to be at risk for a lot of winter weather in the month of February. This is for the whole month, and this is 850 millibar temperature anomalies, which is a good proxy for surface temperatures. Very, very, very cold signal from the CFS, which usually shows warm weather. Now look at this. The other thing, let me go back. This is the cold pattern, and if we switch this over so you can see the height anomalies, look at that big block here. And you can barely see it up here over Alaska. But that is a ridge that will allow cold air to just drain from Siberia into the Arctic, and then eventually come down in here into the United States. This signal is for this shows you that there's storm potential along these blue colors. It's colder and stormier, and if this pokes back in, which it will from time to time, it'll really increase the signal for winter mischief here in the east. The European weekly model is showing similar signals. Cold through mid-February, cold toward the end of February. We get on in here to February the 23rd, 26th, start to moderate toward normal. It looks like as we get on out here. And then by the time we get into toward March and mid-March, 1st of March, mid-March, no real warm air to be found anywhere. Now, this is way, 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 way out. Alright, so don't take this to the bank, but there's a lot of signals lining up that point in this direction. Let me be very practical here about what you need to do to prepare for what's coming, because understanding the meteorology is one thing, but taking action to protect yourself and your family is what actually matters. For Wisconsin and Michigan, Monday and Tuesday are your days to watch. Make sure you have your snow removal equipment ready and allow extra time for travel. Stock up on essentials now while stores are accessible. If you can avoid travel during the Monday night to Tuesday morning window, I strongly recommend doing so. For Indiana and Ohio, Tuesday evening through Wednesday is your window of concern. Prepare now by stocking up on essentials. Make sure you have flashlights, batteries, and non-perishable food in case of power outages. Charge all your devices before the storm arrives. For West Virginia, and the DC area, Wednesday is the day to watch. This system could create hazardous conditions during the morning commute. If you can work from home on Wednesday, that would be wise. If you must travel, give yourself extra time and drive cautiously. And for everyone from the Great Lakes to the Carolinas, keep your eyes on Friday. That system has significant potential, and I will be tracking it closely as we get more data. Beyond the immediate storm threats, you need to prepare for sustained cold. We're talking about temperatures that could remain well below normal for the next 2 to 3 weeks. That means higher heating bills, increased strain on heating systems, and potential for frozen pipes if your home is not properly insulated. Make sure your heating system is working properly. If you have a furnace, check the filter and replace it if needed. If you heat with oil or propane, make sure your tank is full. If you use a wood stove or fireplace, stock up on firewood now. Protect your pipes. Let faucets drip slightly during the coldest nights to prevent freezing. Open cabinet doors under sinks to allow warm air to circulate around pipes. If you have pipes in unheated areas like basements or crawl spaces, consider adding insulation. Check on vulnerable neighbors. The elderly, people living alone, and those with medical conditions are most at risk during extreme cold. A simple phone call or knock on the door can make a huge difference. Keep your car's gas tank at least half full. In extreme cold, fuel lines can freeze if the tank is too low. Make sure you have an ice scraper, snow brush, and emergency supplies in your vehicle, including blankets, water, and snacks. If you lose power, know how to stay warm safely. Never use a gas stove or oven to heat your home. Never run a generator indoors or in an attached garage. Carbon monoxide poisoning kills people every winter during power outages. As we wrap up, I want to emphasize the bigger picture here. What we're experiencing in February 2026 is not just a series of random winter storms. This is a persistent atmospheric pattern that has locked in place and shows little sign of breaking down anytime soon. The polar vortex disruption that began in January has not recovered the way it normally would. The jet stream remains stuck in a highly amplified configuration, and the result is wave after wave of Arctic air and storm systems affecting the same regions repeatedly. This kind of pattern persistence is what separates a rough winter from a historic winter. When you get one major storm, communities can recover. When you get storm after storm with no break in between, the cumulative impacts become overwhelming. Infrastructure gets stressed beyond its design limits. Emergency response resources get depleted. People get exhausted. And the risk of cascading failures increases with each successive event. For those who remember the legendary winter of 2013-2014, that season featured storm after storm stacking up through January and February with barely any breaks in between. This pattern has that same relentless feel to it. We are locked into a configuration that favors repeated shots of cold air and multiple storm systems tracking across the country. And based on what the long-range models are showing, this pattern could persist well into February and possibly into early March. The cold air is going to be firmly in place to support snow across the entire eastern United States through the first week of February. We are not warming up anytime soon. Multiple waves of Arctic air will continue reinforcing the cold, and each disturbance that comes through has the potential to produce accumulating snow. So buckle up, because this is going to be an active week for winter weather across a huge portion of the United States. Stay prepared, stay safe, and stay informed. Check back for updates as these systems develop, because the details will become clearer as we get closer to each event. Things will continue to remain very interesting. And as always, thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We will have